"Shut your mouth! Who do you think you are to talk to my mother like that?" Marcus Porter's roar exploded beside my ear like thunder, and before I could even process what was happening, a slap, heavy as a hammer, crashed across my cheek. I staggered, vision dimming, ears ringing as if someone had pressed a loudspeaker directly against my skull. The metallic taste of blood flooded my mouth, burning so sharply that everything blurred behind a veil of tears. Through that watery haze, I saw Sheila Porter, my mother-in-law, standing tall behind her son. A satisfied smile, cruel and triumphant, spread across her deeply lined face, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. But what happened 15 minutes later, even Marcus and Sheila never imagined. My name is Danielle Porter, and this is the story of how I was forced to learn to fight. Not just to protect my son, but to reclaim myself after the slap that cracked everything in my life open. But before we get there, I need to take you back 3 months earlier, to when I was still naive enough to believe that life in our little apartment in Bloomington was peaceful. If you want to know what pushed our family to the brink of collapse, keep watching. The story has only just begun, and what comes next will make you question, where is the final limit of endurance? That March, our 2-bedroom apartment at Cedar Grove Flats in Bloomington, just outside Minneapolis, was still the most peaceful place I had ever known. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, spilling across the oak crib where my son, Roman, slept soundly. 6 months old, with velvety brown skin and lips pink as newly opened petals. I sat beside him, counting each breath. 1, 2, 3. Every rise and fall of Roman's chest felt like a small miracle. In 6 months, my entire life had transformed. From a graphic designer with back-to-back client meetings, I had become a full-time mother revolving around feedings, diapers, and lullabies. I looked down at my hands. The fingers that once danced over a Wacom tablet were now rough, nails trimmed short, skin dry. The wine-red nail polish I used to love was only a memory. But whenever I looked at Roman's eyes, none of that mattered anymore. The bedroom door opened. Marcus walked in, tall, sharp in a silver-gray suit, the familiar trace of Dior Sauvage drifting behind him. He was a department head at a tech firm in downtown Minneapolis, successful, confident, and to me, once everything. "She's asleep?" Marcus asked softly, bending to kiss my forehead. "Yeah, just settled." I leaned into his shoulder. Took an hour to calm him. Marcus wrapped his arms around me, resting his chin on my head. "You look exhausted," he murmured. "Why don't you visit Dad this weekend? Get some rest. I'll take care of Roman." I felt touched, but then he added, "Besides, Mom just arrived. With her here, I've got it covered." And that was the moment the first shadow slipped into my life, though I had no idea yet. Had I known that peace was merely a thin curtain hiding a storm waiting to erupt, maybe I would have prepared differently. But I didn't. I still believed everything would be fine. And that was the most dangerous belief of all. Sheila Porter entered our lives like a strong wind from Iowa. 62 years old, nearly my height, hair dyed dandelion blonde, always perfectly made up, always wearing cashmere sweaters, even at home. She said this visit to Minneapolis was to help her beloved son's little family. But the very first evening, I sensed something was wrong. We sat around the dinner table. I had made chicken and vegetable stew, my mother's recipe, Marcus's favorite. But Sheila examined her bowl, frowning. Bland. "Sweetheart, stew needs bay leaves and thyme. This is missing flavor." Marcus tasted it. "It's fine, Mom. Danny cooks really well." "Fine?" Sheila's lips curled. "Son, you're used to mediocre food, so anything tastes good to you. I'll teach Danielle how to cook properly." I bit my lip and stayed silent, but shame began spreading inside me. In the days that followed, everything I did became a target for criticism. How I burped Roman, lift him higher, angle left. How is he supposed to burp like that? How I folded laundry. Marcus's shirts are wrinkled. Who folds clothes like this? How I cleaned the floors. Look at the dust in that corner. Let me show you how it's done. And Marcus? He just chuckled and patted my shoulder. Mom just wants to help. Don't take it to heart. But how could I not, when every day I was handed a list of failures about my own life? If I'm honest, I saw the signs long ago. I just chose to ignore them. Italiano restaurant in uptown Minneapolis. I wore a simple black dress and held a box of Godiva chocolates, a small gift for meeting my future mother-in-law for the first time. Mom, this is Danielle, the graphic designer I told you about, Marcus introduced. Sheila looked me up and down, her eyes cold, as if appraising merchandise. Graphic design, huh? Is that stable? Or is it that irregular freelance stuff? I work for a marketing firm. I'm salaried, I replied, still smiling. Ah, I see. She set the chocolate box aside without opening it. Marcus should have dated Emma, Attorney Carter's daughter. She's an assistant prosecutor now, very promising future. That night, she mentioned Emma 7 times, each mention like a needle pricking my fragile young pride. On the way home, I asked Marcus, "Do you think your mom doesn't like me?" "No," Marcus laughed. "Mom's just cautious." I believed him. That was my first mistake. Sheila helped plan the wedding, meaning she made every decision. Lavender? Not classy. It should be cream and champagne gold. Seafood? Marcus is allergic. Change it to beef. A DJ? Absolutely not. A live jazz band is a must. Whenever I objected, Marcus said, "Just let Mom have this one. A wedding is only one day." And I gave in. Until my wedding became Sheila's wedding. Cancun, Mexico. A beach like a dream. Supposed to be the sweetest week of our lives. But Marcus's phone kept buzzing. "Son, I feel so lonely. My blood sugar feels high. I'm worried about you." We cut the trip short, from 7 days to 5. When the doctor confirmed she was perfectly healthy, Sheila just laughed. "I'm old. I worry. Now that you're back, I feel better." That was when I realized Sheila used her health like a leash. When I became pregnant with Roman, everything intensified. "Are you drinking imported New Zealand maternal milk? I ordered some." "No seafood. Don't lift anything heavier than 2 pounds. You have to name the baby Roman after Marcus's grandfather." I wanted Miles, after my own grandfather, but Marcus said, "Sweetheart, Mom would be so upset." So I conceded again. Looking back, I see the pattern clearly. I kept giving in, kept swallowing my anger, kept telling myself it's just a small thing, but those small things piled up into a massive wall, blocking me from the happiness I thought I had. On the 5th day after Sheila moved in, I stood before the bathroom mirror, staring at myself. Dark circles under my eyes, pale skin, hair tied hastily. My postpartum body still bore every mark of motherhood, soft belly, silvery stretch marks etched along my hips. I remembered exactly what Sheila had said at dinner the night before. "Danielle, have you thought about the gym? 6 months postpartum and you still look a little plump." Marcus looked up. "Mom, I'm just being honest. Men like their wives pretty, attractive. His company is full of young women. Be careful or you'll lose your husband." Those words stabbed right into the insecurity I was struggling to hide. I was once confident, independent, secure in my own skin. But 6 months of diapers and sleepless nights can shake any woman. And Sheila, in a frightening way, seemed to sense all of it. Then she added, "Grow your hair out. Short hair makes you look old. Why don't you wear makeup? A little blush would help. Men like a gentle scent. Spray perfume before Marcus comes home." And always followed it with, "I care for you like my own daughter." But I felt the poison in every word, each comment a drop of acid eroding my self-worth. Looking back, I don't know why I stayed silent. Maybe when you live in a house that seems peaceful, you don't notice each brick wearing down until the whole wall collapses. One afternoon, I was breastfeeding Roman. He latched tightly, eyes closed, tiny hand wrapped around my finger, one of those rare, peaceful moments. Sheila walked in without knocking. "You're feeding him wrong. You should hold his head higher." "I'm doing it correctly, Mom," I tried to say calmly. "Correctly? If it were correct, he wouldn't spit up. I raised Marcus on breast milk. I know better. You're doing it wrong." I inhaled slowly. Roman did not spit up the way she claimed, but arguing was pointless. That evening, Marcus came home. I tried to bring it up. "Marcus, I feel like your mom is overstepping. Everything I do is criticized." Marcus, halfway through changing his shirt, turned. "Mom's just trying to help." "But what she says hurts." Marcus sighed. "You're too sensitive. Mom's old. She's not always tactful. Don't overthink it. You'll affect your milk supply." And just like that, my feelings were dismissed. Later, I learned that was gaslighting, making the victim doubt their own perceptions. The worst came shortly after. I knew Sheila smoked, but she promised never to smoke inside. At first, she kept that promise, then caution faded. One afternoon, I took Roman to the park. When I opened the door upon returning, the familiar stench of Newport menthol hit me. Sheila sat on the sofa reading a magazine. The balcony door was slightly open. "Mom, did you smoke inside?" I asked. "No, I smoked outside. The wind blew it in." But the smell clung to the curtains, to the couch, and especially the ash in the plant pot right under Roman's window, the Marlboro pack inside Sheila's purse, and worst of all, Roman started coughing. Not mild cough, a persistent, wheezing, nighttime cough. I knew I couldn't stay silent. "Early morning," Roman cried. I lifted him and immediately smelled smoke on his blanket. I walked through the house. The smell was strongest in the living room, the balcony, right below Roman's window. Around 10 a.m., Sheila woke and went to the kitchen for coffee. I approached her. "Mom, this morning I smelled smoke very strongly in Roman's room." "Did you? Must be from the neighbors," she said casually. "It's not the neighbors, and I found ashes under his window." Her face hardened. "Are you spying on me?" "No, of course not. But Roman is small. Smoke is dangerous for him." She snorted. "Dangerous? When I raised Marcus, everyone smoked. He still grew up fine." "Mom, science." "Science. All nonsense young mothers used to show off. One cigarette won't kill anyone." "But Roman is coughing. He's coughing because of the weather change. Minnesota is unpredictable. Coughing is normal." I tried to stay gentle. "I'm not forbidding you to smoke. I'm just asking you not to smoke near Roman's room. If you prefer, you can go downstairs or use the stairwell." "Stairwell? I'm in my 60s. You want me to drag myself up and down for a baby? You're cruel." The conversation went nowhere. That evening, Marcus came home. Sheila had already delivered her report. "Son, Danielle scolded me today, said I was cruel, and demanded I go to the first floor every time I want to smoke." Marcus turned to me, disappointment in his eyes. "You really said that?" "Marcus, that's not what happened. You just wanted to bully my mother, didn't you? She's old, her legs hurt. You can't be that selfish." "But Roman is fine. Stop exaggerating." I stood there in the small kitchen, under the dim yellow light. Roman coughed in my arms, and the man I loved once again chose his mother over me. 3 weeks after the confrontation, on a freezing April night, the disaster hit. 2 a.m. I jolted awake to a thick, strangled cough, like someone's airway was being squeezed shut. Roman. My son was coughing violently, his tiny body writhing in the crib. I shot up, hands trembling as I flipped on the light. For a second, the brightness blinded me, and then the scene in front of me stabbed straight into my heart. Roman's face was flushed bright red, his mouth wide open, his breathing ragged and wheezy, like someone was squeezing his chest. His tiny hands clutched the blanket, eyes brimming with tears. "Marcus! Marcus!" I scooped Roman up, my heart pounding. His body burned with fever. I rushed into the living room, trying to soothe him while fumbling for the thermometer. The number flashed, 39.2 degrees Celsius. Marcus staggered out of the bedroom, still half asleep. "What's going on?" "Our baby has a fever, and he won't stop coughing." I practically screamed at him. He looked at Roman, worry flickering across his face, but he tried to stay calm. "We'll take him to the doctor in the morning." "No! Now!" I ground out each word. Can't you hear how he's breathing? He can't breathe!" Roman erupted into another fit of coughing, his little body folding in on itself. That was when Marcus finally panicked. "Call 911!" But I wasn't waiting another second. I clutched Roman tightly, raced down to the parking garage, started the car, and sped straight to M Health Fairview Masonic Children's Hospital. Harsh white fluorescent lights, the sharp sting of disinfectant in the air, the hurried footsteps of nurses pounding across the shiny vinyl floor. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the pediatric emergency area, holding Roman against my chest. They'd put an oxygen mask on him, but the coughing still came in waves, his chest rising and falling with painful effort. A Somali nurse named Amina came over, her voice as gentle as if she were speaking to someone about to break. "Try to stay calm. The doctor is on her way." Calm? How can a mother be calm watching her child fight for every breath? A moment later, Dr. Tiffany Garner appeared, a black woman in her 50s, gold-rimmed glasses, crisp white coat. She put on her stethoscope and leaned in to listen to Roman's chest. The emergency room fell silent. Only the steady beep-beep of the monitor and my son's wheezy breaths remained. Finally, Dr. Garner straightened up, her expression grave. "Acute obstructive bronchitis. In a 6-month-old, this is very serious." The world spun around me. How dangerous is it, doctor?" "If we don't intervene in time, it can progress to pneumonia and respiratory failure. We need to admit him immediately." It felt like my legs no longer touched the ground. Tears spilled over before I even realized it. Dr. Garner pulled up a chair and sat down, looking me straight in the eyes. "I need to ask you a few questions. Does anyone in your home smoke?" My throat tightened. I nodded. "My mother-in-law does." "Where does she smoke?" "On the balcony, but it's very close to the baby's window." Dr. Garner nodded, her expression growing heavier. "That is very likely a contributing factor. An infant's airways are extremely narrow and sensitive. Cigarette smoke contains more than 7,000 toxic chemicals. Even small amounts of exposure can cause inflammation and swelling of the airways in babies." I broke down. I told my mother-in-law, but she didn't listen." The doctor finished the sentence for me. "I've seen this far too many times. Older people tend to say, 'Back in my day, everyone smoked and we were fine.' But the reality is, many children have become severely ill. Some have even died from secondhand smoke, and no one ever admits it." I buried my face in my hands, tears streaming through my fingers. "What am I supposed to do now?" "First," the doctor said, enunciating each word, "you must completely isolate your baby from all sources of cigarette smoke. That doesn't just mean no smoking in the house. Anyone who smokes must go completely outside, several meters away from the home, and afterward they must wash their hands and change clothes before touching the baby. Second, we're going to start nebulizer treatments to open up his airways. If there is no improvement, or if he worsens, within 48 hours, we'll have to consider transferring him to the ICU. ICU, Intensive Care Unit." The word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. Sitting there under the harsh white hospital lights, I realized something simple and brutal. Every time I let it slide to keep the peace, I was gambling with my child's health. And that night, for the first time in my life, I asked myself, if I don't stand up to protect my child, who will? Roman was moved to a private room in the pediatric ward. A small room, walls painted a pale yellow, decorated with cute teddy bears. In the center stood a small hospital bed with side rails. Thin tubes snaked from my baby's tiny arm to various machines. The monitor beeped steadily, the sound growing more exhausting the longer I listened. I barely left his side. Every cough made my heart seize. I gave him the nebulizer treatments exactly as instructed, gently rubbed his back whenever he struggled to breathe, and softly sang the lullabies my mother used to sing to me. The next afternoon, Marcus arrived. He brought a stuffed bear and a face full of guilt and worry. "What did the doctor say?" he asked, placing the bear on the shelf. "Bronchitis caused by cigarette smoke," I replied, my voice no longer soft. "Did you hear that clearly? Caused by smoke." Marcus's face turned pale. I'm sorry. I didn't think. Didn't think what? I stared straight at him. Didn't think cigarette smoke was actually dangerous? Or didn't think your wife was worth believing over your mother? Don't say it like that, Marcus stammered. I did talk to Mom. She promised she'd stop. Promised? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. How many times has your mother promised? And now our baby is lying here with IV lines and an oxygen mask. Do you still want to put your faith in her promises? Right then, Roman was racked by another violent coughing fit. Nurses rushed in to adjust the machines and check his oxygen. Marcus stood frozen in the corner, too afraid to come closer. That night, after Marcus left, I sat alone in the room, lit only by the warm yellow glow of a small lamp. Outside the window, Minneapolis glittered with city lights. Cars moved, life went on. But in this tiny room, time stood still. I looked at my son, fragile, small, surrounded by tubes and plastic, and something inside me snapped, then fused back together in a completely different way. Never again. Never again would I let anyone harm my child. Never again would I stay silent to keep the peace. Never again would I let guilt or so-called filial duty dictate my life. On the third day in the hospital, Roman finally began to improve. The coughing spells grew less frequent. His temperature dropped. He slept more peacefully, no longer gasping for air the way he had before. Dr. Garner returned to check on him. She reviewed the readings and smiled. He's responding well to treatment. If nothing changes, he can probably go home in a day. I exhaled, but my face must have still looked drained. The doctor studied me for a long moment, then asked, "And you? Are you okay?" I shook my head. This time I didn't pretend to be strong. She pulled up a chair beside me. "I want to tell you something. Being a mother doesn't mean you have to endure everything. Protecting your child isn't just food and clothing. It's also creating a safe environment for their body and their mind." She paused, then continued, slowly and clearly. "If someone in the family is destroying that environment, you have the right to say no. You have the right to set boundaries, and if they refuse to respect those boundaries, you also have the right to leave." Her words cut through the darkness inside me like a flash of lightning. I was not born just to endure. I was not merely a victim. I had the right to fight. That night, when Roman finally fell asleep and the steady beeping of the heart monitor became a soft, constant background, I took out my phone and dialed. "Dad?" My voice was hoarse from crying. "I need your help." On the other end, my father, Howard Mitchell, sounded calm and steady, just like always. "I'm here. Tell me everything." This time, I did. No sugarcoating, no minimizing. I told him about the criticism, the control, the manipulation, the cigarettes, the way Marcus refused to stand by me, all the way to the night Roman was rushed to the hospital. Dad was quiet for a long time. I could hear his breathing through the phone. Finally, he asked one question. "What do you want?" I clenched my hand and looked over at Roman sleeping, his tiny face peaceful under the soft yellow light. "I want my son to be safe. I want a life where I get to make my own decisions." On the other end, my father's voice shifted, firmer now. "Then you have to leave them, both of them." Those last two words, both of them, fell like the final hammer sealing a door shut. "I'll help you," Dad continued, "but you need to be prepared. This won't just be a family argument. We're walking into a real legal battle." And in that moment, in that small hospital room, I knew. The woman who had stayed silent and swallowed everything was gone. A new mother had just been born, a mother who was ready to fight to the very end. We were discharged on a warm afternoon. The April breeze rustled gently through the trees along the street, as if trying to pretend everything was fine again. The moment we stepped out of the elevator, I saw Sheila waiting by the apartment door. Her eyes were red, a tissue clenched in her hand, her face twisted in grief, as if she'd just lived through some great tragedy. "Danielle, I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know it was that serious." Her voice trembled, tears streaming down her cheeks. A pitiful performance. Once, I might have believed it. Marcus stood beside her, acting like the interpreter of his mother's emotions. "See? Mom feels really bad. She promised she won't smoke in the house anymore." I looked at the Porters, mother and son, without saying a word. I just held Roman tighter, gripping my own sanity. In the days that followed, everything looked peaceful on the surface. Sheila did step out onto the balcony to smoke, standing farther from Roman's window than before. Some days, I even saw her wearing a coat and heading toward the stairwell, as if to prove she was trying. Marcus became more attentive, too. He changed Roman's diapers, rocked him to sleep, even cooked dinner a few times. He smiled at me more, asked how I was doing. I almost wanted to believe that maybe things really had changed, that the hospital scare had woken them up, that maybe this family still had a chance. Until one afternoon, when I dropped an orange in the kitchen. The orange rolled across the floor and disappeared under the base cabinet. I knelt down, reaching under to grab it. But the first thing my fingers touched wasn't the orange. It was something flat, metal, and cold. I pulled it out. A vintage cigarette case, tarnished silver, with engraved cursive initials on the surface, SMP, Sheila Marie Porter. I flipped it open. Inside were 3 Virginia Slims, neatly lined up. My heart started pounding. She hadn't quit. She had just gotten better at hiding. I sank down onto the kitchen floor, the case still in my hand. The wave that crashed over me wasn't just about cigarettes. It was about the promise. About the, I didn't know it was that serious. About the tears. If she could lie so easily about this, what else had she lied about? That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the apartment in the dark, following small traces I'd once chosen to ignore. I started investigating in the most literal sense, sniffing, touching, searching, and I found, in the shared bathroom, a nearly full bottle of mouthwash, clearly used to cover the smell of smoke. In Sheila's handbag, a vape pen, an e-cigarette, less odor, easy to hide. On the balcony, cigarette butts pushed deep into the soil in the planter, cleaned up carefully, but a few small flecks of ash still remained. Sheila hadn't quit smoking. She had simply gone stealth. Sitting alone in the dark kitchen, with the silver case in my hands, I realized this was no longer about a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law not getting along. This was about someone willing to put her own ego and habits above the breath of a 6-month-old child, then cry and play the victim in front of everyone. And I understood, if I kept relying on conversations, I would always be the liar in the story she told. The next morning, while Marcus took Roman to get his vaccines, I called my dad. "Dad, I need to buy a small camera." "What for?" Howard's voice was as deep and steady as ever. "To record the truth." Silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he asked very slowly, "Are you sure? Once you go down this path, it'll be hard to go back to how things were." I looked around the apartment, the place that had once felt like home. "I'm sure." That afternoon, while Sheila was out grocery shopping, I opened the small package on the dining table. The micro camera Dad had ordered online and shipped directly to me. My hands shook a little as I reread the instructions, set it up, and connected it to my laptop. I fixed the camera onto the bookshelf in the living room, adjusting the angle so it captured the living room, the hallway, and part of the balcony where she liked to smoke. I knew, in a way, this was an invasion of privacy, but I also knew that without proof, everything I said would forever be dismissed as imagination, sensitivity, or postpartum depression. This was no longer simple suspicion. This was self-defense. I needed the truth, not just about the smoke, about who Sheila Porter really was. That first night, I sat alone in the bedroom, opened my laptop, and connected to the camera feed. The image was crystal clear. Clip 1. The call with a friend, the real face behind the mask. The camera captured Sheila sitting on the living room sofa, phone wedged between her shoulder and ear. In her hand was the vape pen, wisps of vapor curling into the air. "Zara, you wouldn't believe it," she said. Her voice now was nothing like the trembling tone she used with Marcus. No softness, no fragility, only venom and contempt. That Danielle girl has turned this place into a prison. She forbids this, forbids that, says it's all for the baby Roman, but really she just wants to drive me out. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Sheila snorted. That little mouse? She doesn't have the guts. My Marcus listens to his mother. Always has. I'll slowly turn that wife of his into a nobody in this house. Watching her on the screen, I felt the air being sucked out of the room around me. The same woman who had stood crying at the hospital door saying, "I didn't know it was that serious," was now calling me that little mouse. Clip 2. The call with Marcus. A blatant lie. The next day, the camera recorded Sheila sitting on the couch, dialing Marcus around lunchtime. "Son." Her voice was shaky again, the perfect imitation of a fragile victim. "I can't take it anymore." "What's wrong, Mom?" Marcus's voice came through the speaker. "This morning Danielle yelled at me, said I smelled like an old trunk, and forbade me from using perfume." I have never said that, not a word. I had never even commented on her perfume. "Oh, come on," Marcus sighed. "She's probably dealing with postpartum depression. Try to be understanding." "Depression, my foot," Sheila sobbed. "Son, that's not depression. That's who she really is. She hates me. She's trying to turn you against me." "No, Mom." Marcus rushed to reassure her. "I'll talk to her. Don't worry. You'll never lose me." I closed the video, but the line, "You'll never lose me," echoed in my head for a long time. Not because I was jealous, but because it was obvious that in their story, I was the villain. Everything happening to me was just depression, oversensitivity, or hating my mother-in-law. Clip 3. Property damage. Malice in plain sight. The third video chilled me to the bone. One afternoon, while Roman and I were out walking at Minnehaha Park, the camera recorded Sheila walking into our bedroom. She opened the wardrobe, rummaged through it, and pulled out a navy silk dress, my favorite, bought before I got pregnant, the one I'd hoped to wear again when I got my body back. She held the dress up in front of the mirror, tilted her head, and then suddenly threw it onto the floor. She walked around, then deliberately stepped on the dress with her high heels. Once, twice, 3 times. Each step slow, intentional. Then she went into the bathroom. She picked up the Chanel No. 5 perfume, Marcus's first anniversary gift to me. She opened it and poured nearly half down the sink. After that, she calmly screwed the cap back on and put the bottle back in its exact spot, as if nothing had happened. I watched that clip 3 times. Each time, another layer of doubt peeled away, leaving only cold clarity. This was not getting along. This was calculated malice. I saved all the recordings onto a USB drive and hid it well. That night, after Sheila went to bed, I called Marcus into the living room. "You need to see this," I said, cutting straight to the point. I opened my laptop and played the first video, the one of Sheila vaping, talking on the phone, calling me a little mouse, and bragging about making me a nobody. Marcus stared at the screen. At first his face showed only surprise, then it slowly tensed up. Next came the second video, the phone call between him and his mother, with the fabricated story about me saying she smelled like an old trunk. Marcus sighed. Maybe Mom exaggerated a bit. Women are like that." "Women are like that?" I repeated, struggling not to scream. "You don't see it? This is lying. Your mother is making things up, things I never said." "Calm down," Marcus snapped, his voice growing irritated. "I'm not saying she's right, I just—" "Watch the rest. Watch all of it," I cut him off. I played the third video, the one where Sheila stomped on my navy dress and poured my Chanel No. 5 down the drain. Marcus watched without blinking. His face turned ghostly white. Silence thickened between us like lead. Finally, he spoke. Maybe Mom is stressed. She didn't mean to hurt you." I shot to my feet, stepping back. "What did you just say?" "Don't misunderstand," Marcus said quickly. I know she was wrong, but she's old. Older people do thoughtless things sometimes. She's still my mother. What do you expect me to do? Throw her out on the street?" In that moment, everything became crystal clear. It didn't matter how much proof I presented. It didn't matter what his mother did, how she lied, or how far she went. In the end, Marcus would always stand on Sheila's side. "You know," I said, looking him straight in the eyes, my voice eerily calm, "I used to love you so much. I used to think we were a team. But now I see it clearly. You and your mother are the team. Roman and I, we're the outsiders." "Danielle," Marcus said my name like he was trying to pull me back. "I want a divorce." The words slipped out and fell between us like a silent bomb, but the impact shook everything. Marcus blanched. You're not serious." "I'm more serious than I've ever been." "Because of this? Because of my mother?" His voice rose. "Because of you, Marcus," I answered. "Because you didn't protect me. Because you didn't protect our son. Because you chose not to stand with your own little family." Marcus stood up, his tone turning cold. "You can't just walk out of this marriage that easily. This apartment is in my name. Where do you think you're going?" "I'll figure it out," I said flatly. "And Roman?" He narrowed his eyes. "You really think the court will just hand him to you? I can afford the best lawyers in the city." That was the first time Marcus used our son as leverage and money as a weapon. And it was also the last moment in this marriage that I felt even a shred of hesitation. "Fine," I said, nodding. "Then we'll see each other in court." From that moment on, I knew my story was no longer just about a difficult mother-in-law. This was a real war, and I was done losing. The next morning, after Marcus had gone to work and Sheila was still fast asleep in her room, I dialed Howard's number. "Dad, I need to come home to you." On the other end, there was no surprise, no why, no barrage of questions, just one low, steady answer. "I've been waiting for you." Howard Mitchell, my father, used to be an officer with the Minneapolis Police Department. He had been retired for 3 years. He lived alone in a modest apartment in North Minneapolis, near Ben's old high school, the one I had attended. That afternoon, Dad showed up at Cedar Grove Flats with an old colleague, also retired, driving a pickup truck. No hugging me and sobbing, no interrogations. He just nodded, looked straight into my eyes as if to say, "All right, it's my turn now." We got to work, fast and efficient, like a military operation that had been planned in advance. My clothes and Roman's clothes. Essentials, crib, stroller, toys. Important documents, birth certificate, medical records, invoices for apartment repairs. The USB containing all the video evidence. Within 3 hours, everything that mattered in my life was packed up and loaded into the truck. The apartment I had once called home now held only Marcus and Sheila's belongings. I set the keyring on the kitchen counter and wrote a short note, my handwriting shaky but resolute. "Marcus, I've left. I will be filing for divorce. My attorney will contact you. Danielle." When the door of Cedar Grove Flats closed behind me for the last time, I didn't look back. Not because I was so strong I felt no attachment, but because I knew, if I turned around, my heart would soften, and I was no longer allowing that to happen. Dad's apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, but it was warm, clean, and most importantly, safe. He set up the larger bedroom for Roman and me and moved himself to the pull-out sofa in the living room. "I'm fine, kiddo. I can sleep anywhere," he said, as if that were the smallest thing in the world. In those first days, I moved through life like a ghost. No more fights, no more cigarette smell, no more constant drip of criticism. But inside, I felt hollow. I didn't cry. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I just emptied out. I took care of Roman like a machine. Feed, change, rock to sleep. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Howard didn't push me to open up or vent. He just cooked, watched Roman while I showered, set a glass of water by my bed every night. His presence was a kind of safety I had forgotten existed. A week later, the calls started. Marcus called. 27 missed calls in total, followed by a flood of messages. "Are you insane? Get back here now." "How do you think you're going to live? No house? No money?" "Mom's been crying nonstop. Do you even know what you're doing?" Then it was Sheila's turn, calling from unknown numbers. "Danielle, come back. I'm sorry. I'll change." Her voice started out soft, pitiful. But after a few no's from me, the mask slipped. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you never see Roman again." I sat still, the phone in my hand, listening to every word like hearing a verdict being read out. After that call, Howard walked over, his voice dropping into that low, unmistakable register. "Change your number. Now." Not a suggestion, a command. But it was the first command in years that actually made me feel protected. I changed my number, and for the first time, the silence in the house stopped being frightening. One evening, after Roman had fallen into a deep sleep, I stood leaning against the doorway, watching Howard rearrange the cardboard boxes in the living room. I suddenly realized I was no longer running away. I was executing a strategic retreat, pulling my forces out of enemy territory to build my own fortress, from scratch this time, but with walls, with gates, with clear rules. And inside that fortress, there would be no room for cigarette smoke, lies, or anyone who dared weigh my child's breath against their own habits. Howard introduced me to attorney Felicia Morgan, a well-known family law attorney in Minneapolis. Many people called her the pit bull in pearls because of her relentless attack dog courtroom style, paired with an always elegant appearance. She was in her early 40s, a black woman with smooth dark skin, cornrows braided neatly along her scalp, usually dressed in razor-sharp black suits with a simple strand of pearls around her neck. Our first meeting took place at her office on Nicollet Mall. The room was bright, with walls covered in awards, certificates, and photos of her shaking hands with clients in court. "Tell me everything," she said, switching on a recorder and fixing me with a gaze that was both razor-sharp and steady. I told her, from the beginning, from the day Sheila appeared, the criticism, the interference, to the cigarette smoke, the hospital, the camera, the videos, Marcus's slap, and my decision to leave. When I put the USB drive on the table and said, "This has all the video evidence," Morgan's eyes literally lit up. She plugged it into her laptop and watched each clip. Sometimes she nodded, sometimes she frowned, but she never looked shocked. The look of someone who has seen many tragedies but still hasn't lost her capacity to be outraged by wrongdoing. "Excellent," she finally said. "This is very strong evidence." I bit my lip. "But is it legal? I recorded everything secretly in the house." "Minnesota is a one-party consent state," she explained immediately. "As long as one party to the conversation consents to recording it, it's legal. And that was your home. You lived there. You're completely fine. They can't use this against you." She opened a new file and started making notes. "As for custody, Roman is under 1-year-old and breastfeeding. The court will almost certainly, about 95%, grant you primary custody. For property, yes, the apartment is in your husband's name. But if any renovations or improvements were done during the marriage, and you have the receipts, you can claim half the increased value." She paused on the video where Marcus slapped me, the one I had recorded later and saved as evidence. Her eyes darkened. "And this is domestic violence. We can use it to request a restraining order, as well as file a civil suit for emotional distress. It depends how far you want to go." A battle map slowly took shape on the table in front of us. File for divorce in Hennepin County. Family court request. A temporary order granting me primary custody of Roman request. A restraining order against Marcus for his violent behavior. File a civil suit for emotional damages. Demand 50% of the added value from renovations to the Cedar Grove Flats apartment during the marriage. "Are you ready?" Morgan leaned back, fingers steepled, watching me closely. "This is going to be a tough fight. They'll come at you from every angle they can think of." I was quiet for a few seconds. Images flashed through my mind. Roman with an oxygen mask in the hospital, his wheezy breaths, the smell of smoke in his blanket, Marcus's hammer-like slap. "I'm ready," I said. My own voice sounded strange to my ears. And this time, it wasn't a line I was saying just to sound brave. For the first time in my life, I was stepping into a war. Not as someone clinging to survival, but as someone with nothing left to lose and one thing left to protect: my son. The divorce petition was filed on a Monday at the beginning of June. Marcus was served at work. According to Howard, who still had plenty of contacts in law enforcement, Marcus exploded, slammed his desk, and roared in the middle of the office. "She actually did it?" Marcus's side mobilized quickly. His attorney, Jonathan Bryce, an older man notorious for defending wealthy husbands in divorce cases, immediately filed a counterclaim. In the response submitted to the court, they accused me of abandoning the family, being mentally unstable, showing signs of severe postpartum depression, demanding a 50-50 custody arrangement, the child needs both parents, denying domestic violence, describing Marcus's slap as a spontaneous reaction under provocation. When Attorney Morgan handed me the response to read, I felt the blood rush to my face. Provocation? How exactly had I provoked him? By begging my own husband to protect our son from his mother's cigarette smoke? Hennepin County Family Court, the gray building on Fifth Avenue. Courtroom 4B. I sat next to Attorney Felicia Morgan, my fingers clenched so tightly the knuckles had turned white. Across from us were Marcus, Attorney Bryce, and Sheila. Sheila was dressed impeccably. A pale blue cardigan, carefully styled curls, light makeup to give her that gentle, respectable older lady look. No one in that room would have guessed she had stomped on her daughter-in-law's dress and poured half a bottle of Chanel perfume down the drain. The judge assigned to our case was a Latina woman named Maria Gonzalez, in her 50s, sharp-eyed and stingy with smiles. Bryce opened. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Marcus Porter, is a devoted husband and father. His wife's sudden departure from the home without notice, taking their infant child, was impulsive, unilateral, and emotionally harmful to the baby." He paused, glanced at me, then continued. "We have evidence that Mrs. Danielle Porter is experiencing severe postpartum depression with paranoid tendencies." Morgan stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. There is no medical record to support that claim." Judge Gonzalez nodded, her tone cool. "Sustained. Mr. Bryce, if you have no evidence, do not make unfounded statements." Bryce retreated a little, then shifted tactics. "Very well, Your Honor. But we do have a witness, Mrs. Sheila Porter, my client's mother." Sheila was called to the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible, took the oath, then lifted her face with the perfect expression of sorrow. "Mrs. Porter, what is your impression of Mrs. Danielle?" Bryce asked. Sheila dabbed the corner of her eye, her voice trembling. "I love my daughter-in-law like my own child, but I must be honest. Danielle changed a lot after the baby was born. She became suspicious, easily angered. She accused me of poisoning my grandson, said I was trying to harm the family." She inhaled dramatically, then teared up again. One time she even screamed at me, called me an evil old hag, and said I smelled like an old trunk left in the attic. I stared at her, feeling like I was watching an actress deliver a monologue. Every word was a lie, but she said them with such sincerity that if I weren't the target, I might have doubted myself. Under the table, I dug my nails into my palm, clutching Morgan's sleeve. When it was Morgan's turn, she walked calmly to the witness stand. "Mrs. Porter, do you smoke cigarettes?" "I do, but very rarely." "Do you smoke inside the house?" "No, I always go out on the balcony." "Are you aware that your grandson, Roman, was hospitalized for bronchitis, and that his pediatrician concluded it was due to smoke exposure?" Sheila hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I heard something like that, but it wasn't my fault. I never smoked in the house." Morgan didn't argue back verbally. Instead, she returned to our table, opened her laptop, and addressed the judge clearly. "Your Honor, I'd like to present several video clips." The large screen in the courtroom flickered on. First video, Sheila sitting on the living room sofa, holding a vape pen, exhaling clouds inside the house. Second video, Sheila entering our bedroom, pulling my navy silk dress from the closet, stomping it under her heels, then pouring Chanel number 5 down the sink. The courtroom went dead silent. Sheila's face drained of color. Marcus stared at the screen, then turned to his mother, his expression twisted with confusion. Judge Gonzalez frowned. "Mrs. Porter, would you like to explain these videos?" I was under a lot of stress," Sheila stammered. "I didn't mean—" The hearing ended with a temporary order. Roman would remain in my care. Marcus would have supervised visitation on weekends. Sheila was prohibited from any contact with Roman until the court completed its investigation into the smoke and living conditions. It was a small victory, but I knew this was only the first shot in a long war. Before all this, whenever I watched courtroom scenes in movies, I always thought, that world is so far from mine. Yet now here I was, sitting in courtroom 4B, hearing my own name echo through the room, watching lies unravel under the glare of recorded evidence, and understanding something clearly. Court is not a place where people win by being pitiful. It is a place where the truth gets a voice, if you are brave enough to drag it into the light and strong enough to withstand the backlash that follows. From that moment on, I was no longer just a victim on the defensive. I had become an active combatant in this war. After the first hearing, the battlefield shifted from the courtroom back into everyday life. Sheila began calling every mutual acquaintance, neighbors, church friends, Marcus's former co-workers. Anywhere there were ears, she told her version of the story. Danielle is greedy. She married my son for money. Now she wants a divorce to steal the apartment. She kidnapped Roman and won't let Marcus see his own child. It's cruel. Some people believed her. A few people I'd once considered close started avoiding me, no longer texting to check in. But others saw right through it. Jada Winston, my best friend from college, called me. "Danny, I always knew Sheila was trouble. I'm on your side. If you want to hit back, we do it properly." It was Jada who planted the idea. "Have you ever thought about telling your story publicly? You don't even have to use names, just enough so women like you know they're not alone." So we wrote an anonymous blog post together and published it on a local forum, titled, "How I Survived Leaving a Toxic Husband and Mother-in-Law." In it, I told everything, changing names and identifying details, but keeping the emotional truth intact, the patterns of control, manipulation, and psychological abuse. The post spread faster than I expected. Hundreds of supportive comments. Dozens of women shared similar stories of their own. No one knew Danielle in the blog was me, but people in Minneapolis, especially those at Marcus's company, started whispering. Something in that story sounded familiar. Marcus called me, his voice shaking with anger. "You wrote that, didn't you?" "Which one are you talking about?" I asked, even though I knew. "Don't play dumb. People at work are looking at me like I'm some kind of wife-beater." "You did hit me, Marcus," I replied, strangely calm. "One slap, just one. And now you're trying to destroy my whole career?" "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply telling the truth. Your career, you built it, and you're the one tearing it down." While preparing the financial disclosures, Morgan asked me to bring every document related to the Cedar Grove Flats apartment: purchase agreement, mortgage papers, repair receipts, material invoices. She sat down, put on her glasses, and read through each page carefully. After a while, her brows knit. "This is Marcus's name, yes. But the purchase date is 2018. That's before the two of you got married." "Yes," I nodded. "He told me he bought it with money from his mother." Let me double-check the ownership history." 2 days later, Morgan called me back into the office. As soon as I walked in, she was smiling. "Danielle, have a seat. I have some very interesting news for you today." "What is it?" The Cedar Grove Flats apartment, according to the county recorder's records, was transferred to Marcus Porter in 2014, not 2018. Exactly 11 years ago, from Sheila Porter. I blinked. "What does that mean?" It means the apartment originally belonged to Sheila. She transferred it to Marcus as a gift, all finalized long before he married you. Under Minnesota law, a gifted asset acquired before marriage is considered separate property. I thought back to the things Marcus had said, especially the time he'd offered. If you drop the domestic violence claim, I'll sign the apartment over to you, put it entirely in your name. But he offered to transfer it to me if I dropped the charges, I said slowly. So basically, he was giving me something that never really belonged to us as a marital asset? Not exactly, Morgan shook her head. The original apartment is indeed his separate property. But during the marriage, the two of you renovated and upgraded it, increasing its value, and you have the receipts. That increase in value is marital property. You can claim 50% of that. She leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased. Put simply, you don't need any gift from Marcus. All you have to do is claim what the law already says is yours. I sat there, feeling as if someone had just pulled the last veil from my eyes. Marcus had tried to trick me one more time, using the apartment as bait, pretending he was sacrificing everything for me. But this time, I was no longer the woman standing in the kitchen, biting her tongue and swallowing her hurt. I had an attorney, I had evidence, I had the law, and most important, one late afternoon at the end of June, I got a call from Attorney Bryce. "Mrs. Porter, my client would like to meet with you, to sign a settlement agreement." His voice was smooth and excessively polite, which immediately put me on guard. "What kind of agreement?" I asked. "He agrees to all the terms you requested, custody, child support, and the compensation related to the condo." I narrowed my eyes, even though he couldn't see it through the phone. "Why now?" "He's tired," Bryce replied. "He wants to end this peacefully. We can meet at Cedar Grove Flats, do the key handover, and sign the paperwork all at once, quick and clean." I hung up and immediately called Attorney Morgan, recounting every word. "What do you think?" I asked. "Smells like a trap," she said bluntly. "But we can still go, on one condition: you do not go alone." "You mean I go with you, and your father should be there too?" I nodded, even though I was the only one in the room. "All right, then we face them, but this time on their home turf, with enough witnesses." The meeting was set for Friday at 3 p.m. The sky over Bloomington was overcast, gray clouds piling up as if announcing a storm. I arrived at Cedar Grove Flats with Attorney Morgan and Howard. Marcus opened the door. He stood in the doorway, tension etched into his face, sweat dotting his forehead. "Come in," he muttered, stepping aside. In the living room, Attorney Bryce was already there, fussing with his tie. And of course, Sheila was there too, sitting ramrod straight on the sofa, eyes cold, lips pressed into a hard line. "My associate is stuck in traffic," Bryce said with a courteous smile. "We can start discussing things first, can't we?" "No," Morgan replied crisply. "We start when everyone is here, or not at all." The air in the room was thick. Howard stood near the door, hands in his coat pockets, but his eyes swept the space continuously, as if reading a crime scene. Sheila stood up and slowly walked over to the china cabinet. She opened it and pulled out a small wooden box. My heart lurched. It was my jewelry box, the gold pieces my mother had left me, the ones I thought were gone forever. "This is yours," Sheila said, her voice sweet and icy. "You left it behind." As she spoke, she walked closer to the window. I didn't even have time to react before everything happened at once. Sheila suddenly threw the window wide open and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Robbery! Robbery! Thief!" And right in front of us, she hurled the box out the window. The sound of shattering glass exploded from the sunroom of the apartment below. I froze. At that exact moment, 2 police officers appeared in the doorway, as if they had been waiting in the hallway all along. "We got a call about a robbery," one of them said. Sheila immediately pointed at me, her voice shaking but loud enough to fill the room. "That's her! That woman broke into my son's apartment, stole my jewelry, and threw it out the window to destroy the evidence." One of the officers turned to me. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say for yourself?" I opened my mouth, but for the first few seconds, No sound came out, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was stunned by the sheer brazenness of this performance. In that moment, standing in the living room that had once been my home, watching my mother's jewelry box fall, hearing the glass shatter, and Sheila shriek, "Thief!" I understood something with painful clarity. This was no longer a story about a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, or even an ordinary divorce. They were willing to stage a scene, fabricate charges, call the police, and drag the entire legal system into it just to paint me as the villain. And if I didn't have Howard, didn't have Attorney Morgan, didn't have the evidence we'd prepared, I might have been the one in handcuffs that day. This fight wasn't over. On the contrary, this was the real climax, the point at which either I would be crushed or their final mask would fall off in front of everyone. Before I could stammer out a word, Howard stepped forward, his voice low and solid like a safety being cocked on a gun. "Officers, my name is Howard Mitchell, retired lieutenant, 25 years in the investigative division of the Minneapolis Police Department, and I can state unequivocally this is a false report." Sheila snapped back almost instantly. "He's her father! Of course he'll take her side!" "Yes, I am her father," Howard replied calmly. "But I also know the law well enough to always record what needs recording." He took out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned on the speaker. Sheila's voice burst out from the phone, clear, unmistakable, undeniably hers. "You think we're going to let her walk away with that condo so easily? Naive. Just wait. I'll teach her a lesson. All I have to do is scream robbery, and whose side do you think the police will take?" Then came the sound of her mocking laugh. After that, the very same noises we'd just heard minutes ago. Her screaming robbery, the window being flung open, something heavy thrown, glass shattering. Sheila's face went chalk white, as if all the blood had drained out. The two officers looked at each other, their expressions changing immediately. "One of you please write down my badge number," Howard added. "If necessary, I'm ready to provide the original audio file and testify in court about this false report." One officer turned to Sheila. "Mrs. Porter, you do understand that filing a false police report is a criminal offense, correct?" Sheila began to tremble. Her chest heaved, one hand clutching it. I thought—" But it didn't stop there. Attorney Morgan stepped forward, as if she had been waiting for this exact beat. "And officers, there is another legal detail you might find interesting." She turned to Bryce and Marcus, her voice as sharp as a blade. "This apartment, according to county recorder records, was transferred from Sheila Porter to Marcus Porter in 2014, that is, before he married my client." She looked directly at Marcus. "What does that mean?" "It means that when you so nobly offered to give this apartment to your wife in a settlement, you were trying to use something whose increased value is already considered marital property under the law as a bargaining chip and a tool of pressure." Marcus stood rigid beside her, his face drained of color. Bryce leaned in, whispering urgently to him, but Marcus just shook his head, like a man whose last handhold had been kicked away. Sheila started gasping. Her chest rose and fell in jagged bursts, her hand clutching at her heart. My heart!" She staggered, then crumpled to the floor. "Mother!" Marcus shouted, dropping to his knees beside her and shaking her. One of the officers immediately called paramedics. Howard stepped back to give them space to work. None of us wanted, or needed, Sheila to pass out right then, but her body had chosen its own moment to collapse. 15 minutes later, an ambulance pulled up in front of Cedar Grove Flats, siren wailing. They loaded Sheila onto a stretcher and carried her down. Marcus walked beside her, one hand gripping the rail. Just before the ambulance doors closed, he turned back to look at me. His eyes were full of hatred, as if every tragedy in his life had just come crashing down on him because of me alone. "Are you happy now?" he spat. "You've killed my mother." The doors slammed shut. The siren wailed away down the street. I stood on the sidewalk outside Cedar Grove Flats, cold wind lashing my face. Beside me, Howard and Attorney Morgan were silent. Inside, I felt no triumph, only a strange, hollow space. "No, Marcus, I did not kill your mother. She chose to destroy herself through lies, manipulation, and dirty tricks that today, finally, were dragged into the daylight in front of the very people she thought she could control forever. Sheila did not die. The heart attack turned out to be a severe panic episode. She was discharged after 2 days, but the false report incident stayed on record. The final outcome? Sheila was fined $500 and put on 1 year of probation. As for Marcus, after that day, he completely fell apart. Bryce quietly withdrew and advised Marcus to accept the divorce settlement instead of continuing to wage war. A week later, we signed the final agreement at Attorney Morgan's office. I received sole legal and physical custody of Roman. Marcus was granted supervised visitation every other weekend. Marcus had to pay $1,500 per month in child support. He had to pay $800 per month in spousal support until Roman turned 3. Regarding the condo, Marcus agreed to sell and split the proceeds equally. 2 months later, the condo sold for $285,000. After subtracting the mortgage, each of us received $67,500. With that money, I bought a small one-bedroom condo in Longfellow near Lake Nokomis. Quiet, with parks, perfect for a single mom with a young child. There are moments when you think the last chapter has closed, but in truth, it's just a comma before a new part of your life. When I signed those documents, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt like I had finally stepped back onto solid ground after a long storm. From here on, I would have to relearn how to live, how to trust, and how to breathe. The months after the divorce were not easy. There were nights I lay awake, worrying about money. Sometimes, looking at Roman sleeping and seeing traces of Marcus in his face, I wondered if I was depriving him of a complete family. But Howard always reminded me, "You gave that boy a safe family. That's enough." I went back to freelance graphic design. At first it was exhausting, but after a few months, my client base became more stable. I worked from home, juggling deadlines and diapers. Jada connected me with a divorce support group in North Loop. Every week we met, telling stories, crying together, then laughing together. There, I met women stronger than any storm, and I realized I was not alone. A year after the divorce, on an autumn afternoon in Minnehaha Park, my life quietly turned in a new direction. Roman, now 18 months old, was locked in a tug-of-war over a small sand bucket with a little girl. "No, mine," Roman pulled. "No, Maya's." The girl pulled back. A black man in his 30s and I rushed over at the same time. "Sorry," we blurted in unison, then burst out laughing. "My kid is very determined," I said, embarrassed. "So is mine," he grinned. "I'm Calvin Rhodes. Danielle Porter." Calvin was an architect, divorced for 2 years, raising his 5-year-old daughter, Maya. He was kind, steady, and most importantly, he respected every boundary I drew. We kept meeting at the park, then coffee, then dinner. Calvin didn't rush, didn't push. He didn't try to fix me. He simply stayed. One evening, as we sat on a bench by Lake Nokomis, watching the sun slowly sink, Calvin turned to me and said, "Danielle, you don't have to be perfect. I just want you to be you." And for the first time in a long time, I felt accepted. Marcus never truly got back up after that fall. I heard he moved back in with Sheila. He started drinking heavily. His job performance crashed. A year later, he was fired for poor performance. He found other jobs, but never again reached management level. As for Sheila, after the case, she shrank. Still sharp-edged, but no longer strong enough to control anyone's life. The last time I saw her was at a hearing about visitation arrangements. She looked much older, gray hair, hunched back, gaunt face. She looked at me, her eyes red. "Danielle, I'm sorry." This time her voice carried no sarcasm, no calculation, just the raw truth of a woman who had pushed herself to the edge. I nodded. "I accept your apology, but I can't forget." Then I turned away. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean allowing someone back into your life. Forgiveness simply means, I have decided to move on. 2 years have passed since the day I walked out of Cedar Grove Flats. Tonight, I am sitting in the small kitchen of my place in Longfellow. Roman, now almost 3 years old, is sleeping soundly in his room. Outside the window, snow falls softly over Minneapolis, whispering to the winter night. I look back over my journey, from a weak, frightened woman to a strong, independent single mother who knows how to put her own worth first. What have I learned? Lesson 1. Boundaries are not selfish. There was a time I thought love meant accepting everything. It doesn't. Love means respect and being respected. Setting boundaries is not rejecting others, it is protecting yourself. Lesson 2. Silence is complicity. Every time I stayed silent at an insult, I was telling them they could continue. We teach people how to treat us through what we are willing to tolerate. Lesson 3. Violence is not just fists and kicks. Marcus only slapped me once, but he hit me hundreds of times with his words, his indifference, his choice to side with his mother instead of protecting his wife. Emotional abuse is still abuse. Lesson 4. Protecting your child is not just food and clothing. Roman might eat well and dress nicely, but if he grew up in a toxic environment, he would carry wounds for the rest of his life. A child has the right to grow up in safety, physically and emotionally. Lesson 5. Leaving is not failure. For a long time, I thought divorce was the death of my family. But failure doesn't lie in leaving. Failure lies in staying where you are being destroyed. Leaving is courage. It is choosing yourself. Some lessons are paid for with pain, but in return, they open another door, the door through which you finally see yourself clearly. When I realized I had lived too long in fear, I knew that the journey back to peace would never be pointless. If you are reading or listening to this story and recognize yourself in its details, I want to tell you one thing. You are not crazy. When someone keeps telling you you are too sensitive, overthinking, that may very well be gaslighting. Trust your intuition and your own feelings. You are not alone. Millions of women are going through what you are. Seek help from family, friends, or support groups. You deserve happiness. No one, not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not anyone, has the right to make you feel small or worthless. If you want to leave, plan carefully. Gather evidence, texts, emails, videos, if legal. Prepare financially, a separate account, a small savings fund. Find a safe place, parents, friends. Consult an attorney, and absolutely, do not announce your plan in advance. Heal. Do not rush into a brand new life immediately. Give yourself time to breathe, reflect, and recover. Therapy, support groups, journaling, yoga, anything that helps you find yourself again. Believe in the future. Life after divorce is not easy, but it can be beautiful, peaceful, and brighter than you imagine. I am living proof. Roman is now 3 years old, a healthy, lively little boy who is always smiling. Calvin and I are slowly building a relationship, careful but genuine. I have work I love. I have a small home that is mine. I have my own voice. Marcus still sees Roman every other week. We only talk when necessary, politely, for our son's sake. As for Sheila, I no longer feel anger toward her. I only feel pity for a woman who spent her entire life trying to control others and ended up losing everything. Tonight, as I tuck Roman into bed, he asks, "Mom, are you happy?" I smile and kiss his forehead. "Yes, baby, I'm very happy." And that is the truth. Because happiness is not the absence of problems. Happiness is having the strength to face those problems. Happiness is when you are no longer afraid. Happiness is when you choose yourself.